Chapter 8, 2010. Andy's Parkinson's was progressing seriously. The relentless shaking of his hands, arms, head, and legs transformed him into an exhausted, disabled, very thin, and fragile man. He could not feed himself anymore, and this was hard and humbling for all involved. Andy was spoon-fed 3 meals a day by me, one of our adult kids, or various kind neighbors who volunteered to help us. If you have never spoon-fed an adult, it is not comfortable. The feeder must rise above the idea of helping the helpless and move into a higher level of understanding that allows the act of feeding another human being to be one of respect and grace. The person being fed must find it in themselves to be grateful without allowing humiliation into the mix. Feeding Andy became a sacred act, a loving gesture, sometimes a humorous time. He could neither get in nor out of a chair, roll over in bed, drive, or walk more than a few steps. He could not brush his teeth or shave. The list of what he couldn't do grew longer and longer. What he could do was think for himself and talk, and those 2 abilities made him continue to be the brilliant man in mind and heart that I had always known. We decided to go to India again, motivated by the opportunity for Andy to work with the Ayurvedic doctor, Nisar Sheikh. Andy had never met Dr. Nisar, but his last name, pronounced Sheikh, made us all laugh and conclude that under these circumstances, we'd be crazy to give up an opportunity to work with him. Alana was already in India working with the children at the orphanage near Dehradun. Andy and I booked flights to go to Pune, outside of Mumbai, planning to meet up with her later. Dr. Nisar was to meet us and drive us to an ashram in Kamshet, where he had a medical clinic. For 6 weeks, Andy would receive panchakarma healing treatments, yogic practices, and herbal nutritional therapy. I would be there to support him for the first 4 weeks, and then travel for 2 weeks to Ladakh to connect with Alana and my sister and niece before we met Andy at the airport in Delhi to return home. We were very excited. The 15-hour flight was a challenge we'd been successful at before. Now, Andy was not certain he would be able to walk off the plane after sitting for such a long time. We were given bulkhead seats, and the extra legroom was helpful. Andy did walk off that plane, though, and through customs and to our waiting car. Our driver took us to our friend's home in Delhi. It was new for me to be uncertain about something as basic as my husband being able to walk off an airplane. I could see he had to dig very deeply to do it. We knew from experience that it was different to be disabled in India. People are generally kinder and have a gentler sensibility about imperfection in all things, including human beings. The idea of perfection is not idolized the way it is at home. It was as if the negative balloon of expectations that constantly floats in our culture had been punctured. When we awoke in our friend's home in Delhi, we were served a breakfast of mangoes, bananas, porridge, and chapatis with honey. Our hired driver drove us to the domestic airport for the flight to Pune. On the 2-hour-long flight, I marveled out the window. I knew that India was a land completely different in climate, cleanliness, attitude, and culture from my home in the U.S. But looking down from this airplane window, it looked exactly the same as home. The earth fooled me into seeing similarity when I knew from experience there was so much difference. Perhaps my lesson was that in rising above, all the differences disappeared and became irrelevant. I was going to practice this idea of rising above. Nisar was indeed there to greet us when we arrived. He was a tall man, especially for an Indian. His bright smile stood out in the crowd of greeters. I felt myself relax in the safety of his presence. He was graceful in his body and sturdy and solid in his demeanor. I met him during Ramadan, and he was fasting from sunup to sundown, as all practicing Muslims do. His exuberance for sharing our evening meal after sundown was infectious and gave away his youth. We waited to eat, even though none of us were Muslim, for the sheer joy of being with him. We also immediately noticed that it was hot, very hot, probably 112 degrees Fahrenheit. Nisar had a car and driver, and who took us to his clinic in Pune. Andy and I rested while Nisar went to pray, and we watched a very big water buffalo lumber by. Nisar returned and made many notes about Andy and his health. Then we bundled back into the car and went to see a more senior Ayurvedic doctor who was one of Nisar's teachers. Dr. Anil had a busy clinic filled with many waiting patients, and we took our place in line. After Andy's examination, we got back into the cramped car and drove another 3 very hot hours. Nisar finally said, "This is the local village of Kamshet where our ashram is located." I saw ramshackle buildings and serious faces, heard barking dogs, and tasted the dust blowing in the window. I couldn't, in that moment, imagine being at ease there. Maybe the ashram would be better. We crossed a river where many women were washing brightly colored clothes. I noticed a very large white Hindu temple just as we turned into the driveway that led to the ashram grounds. We passed a guard and welcome hut and followed the long driveway until it ended in a dirt parking area. We wheeled our bags along a covered walkway through a flower garden. Children played soccer on a dirt field, and we learned that this ashram was also an orphanage. The kids glanced our way as we shuffled toward our accommodations. Exhausted, and the heat of the day numbed my ability to fully appreciate the grounds and the facility. We entered a central courtyard encircled by 10 guest room doors facing the garden. There was green grass and a geometric design of bushes in the center, and a covered circular walkway that encompassed all the rooms in the structure. As we wheeled our bags along, I noticed that even though the shade over the walkway must have been reducing the heat, I still could not imagine it being any hotter. Our room was full of furniture. None of it matched or made any sense. A giant television sat on a table that took up 1/4 of the room. We were told it didn't work. 2 single beds were made up with matching bedspreads, and there was a large armoire and several chairs with wheels. It looked like a storeroom. I excavated my imagination to find ways to make this room livable for the next month. I pulled back the bed quilt to see if there were sheets, when hundreds of tiny black bugs scattered and scrambled across the bed. I lost my composure. Dr. Nisar and the man from the ashram didn't seem to understand my distress. They moved the mattress outside and laid it on the walkway, and we all watched as the bugs began to disperse. "We will put the mattress back after some time out here, and most of the bugs will be gone," the man from the ashram said to me. "No," I replied, "I do not want that mattress, or that bed, or that room. Please find us a different room without any bugs in the beds." They looked at me like I was half mad. We inspected other rooms and found one that was cleaner and had no bugs. I made our beds with bedding we brought from home and put on headphones, Mason Jennings singing in my ears while I pumped water and cried from exhaustion. "I'm so sorry we're going through all this," Andy said. "We can just leave tomorrow if you want." I felt touched by his willingness to appease my discomfort. "No," I said, "we can give this a try. I can be braver, especially if it helps your Parkinson's." We went to sleep, only to be jarred awake an hour later from very loud Hindu chanting and instruments being played on very bad speakers. We just laughed and laughed. We lay awake until jet lag and fatigue came to our rescue. I got up at dawn and did my yoga routine out on the covered walkway just outside our door. Andy tried to sleep a little longer. I noticed small birds in the sky as it moved into daylight. Breathing deeply and doing my familiar movements and poses gave me a calm I hadn't felt recently. A man and woman came out of one of the other rooms and spoke to me in English. Mr. Naidu and his adult daughter, Priya, were here on vacation to get some relief from the heat of Mumbai. Really, I thought, it's amazing to think of this ashram as a vacation spot. Andy and I walked together out of the circular guest area over to a rectangular building which housed a kitchen and dining area. An open space overflowed with all the orphans sitting awaiting breakfast. All the tables were empty except one, occupied by Mr. Naidu and Priya. I chose one near them, settled Andy into a chair, and walked to the buffet counter to serve our breakfast. I started with chai. The chai in India is legendary. I tasted my first sip of heaven at the orphanage where we first volunteered. Little did I know that the same delicious chai is made all over India, and the quality is fabulous, whether at an orphanage, ashram, travel agency, or roadside welding shop. Chai is chai is chai and will never be matched in any other country. I eagerly poured us 2 cups and carried them over to our table. The rest of breakfast, and all the rest of the food we ate there for a month, was abysmal. Culturally, only the chapatis made sense to us. We ate a lot of them. We were lifelong vegetarians, and this ashram served a lot of meat. What we were left with were sticky white balls of something, dal, that was often very thin, a spicy mash of cereal, and eggs. After breakfast, Andy lay on his bed under the ceiling fan, and I explored our new home. Most of the other 10 rooms were empty that day. At one end of the circle was a large communal room with chairs, a TV that worked, and some games and tables. Jogging paths wound through fruit trees and gardens. I saw a large penned area full of emus, and I could see the dining hall and car parking area just beyond. Across from the dining hall were children's dorms, and past the dorms were fields for sports. More fruit trees lined the long driveway that led to the gated entrance. 6 or 7 large cages lined the other side of the driveway. Each imprisoned one animal. A sad little zoo presented a strange welcome. The caged monkey looked so cute and approachable, but anyone who came too close to the bars triggered his anger and unholy screams. We enjoyed getting to know Dr. Nassar and learning about his devout Muslim family. He had a financially poor upbringing, but his family was wealthy in love and cared for each other. We found it admirable that he had worked his way through Ayurvedic medical school using his yogic practices training to earn the tuition. Andy's treatment was extensive. Nassar asked me to make a chart of all the various treatments he needed to do every day so we could make sure he kept up with it all. Andy followed this chart, which included many physical exercises, meditation, mantras, visualizing positive images, and yoga. This routine was in addition to all the Ayurvedic treatments of Shirodhara, oil dripping, massage, basti, enema, psychological conversations, and also 3 meal times each day. The first week was actually kind of horrible. Ayurvedic treatments involved drenching one's body in oil every day, and Andy's showering always involved me. 3 or 4 times every day, I would soap and wash him with hot water. I always got very wet, and it was tricky scrubbing his legs and feet as I would kneel on the hard tile. Even after showering, there was residue on Andy's skin, and black flies tortured him. Our sleep was difficult because our very bright lights shined in our windows and upset our dark and light rhythms. It was very loud at all times of the night, religious music blaring out of crackling speakers from the temple outside the ashram walls. Andy's feet and ankles remained swollen from travel and concerned me. We had no phone and no one to guide us into town for anything we might want or need. I think I am frustrated because I feel very stuck and out of control, I wrote in my journal. I am who I am. I am not from a country or a family that promoted peaceful acceptance. I rediscovered and embraced my own culture that allowed for changing what could be changed. I saw a lot before me that looked changeable. Within a week, we were in a much better situation at the ashram. I had found the main light switch panel. Each evening, just before sleep, I turned off the bright lights that shined in our window. I went to the ashram office and requested that a child proficient in English walk me into town and translate for me at shops. Young Anirudh, a 10-year-old, bright-eyed boy, became my guide and companion. We put minutes onto the cell phone I had borrowed from Dr. Nassar and spent time at the hot, dusty shop that rented time on 4 old computers with occasional internet. There wasn't much to supplement our meager diet, but I could and did bring home bananas. Anirudh directed me to purchase a fly zapper. It looked like a small tennis racket, but killed flies efficiently with an electric zap. It felt odd to me to have so much reverence for some creatures and complete disregard for others. But that is India. I was discovering it was a place of many ironies and disparities. After I created a better physical environment for myself, I was able to stand back and truly see how Andy was doing. One of the first noticeable effects of our travel was his extremely swollen feet. He could barely get his flip-flops on, much less closed-toe shoes. His shaking seemed worse, and his confidence did too. At home, we had purposely found foods that he could eat without help, usually a chunk of cheese and a bowl of crackers. We brought along straws wherever we went, and if he was careful not to touch the glass or bottle with his shaking hand, Andy could drink by himself. In India, He was completely dependent on me to feed him, and the straws made drinking clumsier as they couldn't balance in the tiny cups at the ashram. I could see this was making cracks in the delicate shield of self-confidence that he had left. We performed our feeding ritual 3 times a day in front of the other ashram guests and under the watchful eyes of the children who called the ashram home. As the rooms in our courtyard were filling up, we became known guests. In Ayurvedic treatment, meals are part of the medicine. It felt awkward feeding Andy bites with a spoon while being watched. I decided to withhold judgment, to wait and see what happened over time, and to jump in with both feet and allow feeling like a spectacle to be as fun as possible. We ended up bonding with other guests and many of the kids at those meal times we shared. Dr. Nassar had started Andy on an intense program of medicine, treatment, and exercises. In addition to the meals, Andy had to down a tablespoon of ghee upon awakening. Then there were 2 herbal medicine powders, one added and mixed in heated milk, and the other added to freshly peeled and chopped ginger. Preparing these medicines required me to go to the kitchen and request a cup of milk each morning, carry it over to our living quarters, and then climb the 3 flights of stairs with it to the top of the tower where Nassar's treatment rooms were located. Then I would clean out a metal pan with my purified water and light a tiny burner attached to a small propane bottle and heat the milk. Careful now, Michelle, I'd think. The milk boils quickly, so don't get distracted looking out the window. The window in Dr. Nassar's room enticed me. I could see down 50 feet to the geometric shapes and patterns that made up the ashram grounds. My bird's eye view drew me in. I could see out beyond the boundary of low stone walls to the river and the temple and surrounding lands. I could suddenly smell milk getting too hot. I grabbed the rag I used as a potholder and rescued my medicine base. The pan had no handle, so I had to hold it by the rim. There was no knife for peeling and chopping ginger, only a spoon. No clean water was available to wash used items, so I brought my own that I'd pumped into my Nalgene bottle. After cleaning up, I'd use a small silver tray to carry the finished medicine back down the 3 flights of steps through the common TV area and back to our room, where Andy would take it all down. We did this morning and evening before breakfast and dinner. Before and during my medicine making, Andy was doing prescribed yogic exercises designed by Dr. Nassar and beginning with the sound mantra Om, chanted Om 5 times, followed by raising arms up and down in vigorous motion, a Ram chant, and other 5 Om chants that were sustained with longer and longer breaths. This took about 20 minutes and was followed by the yoga asanas and poses Andy had done for 30 years at home. Next, he followed a physical regimen, also created by Dr. Nassar, that included movement and exercises designed to reopen channels in his brain that were not functioning well. Andy would walk backwards, move his arms up and down in opposing directions, and balance on one foot and then the other. Then he would sit and meditate for 15 or 20 minutes. Then take a long walk around the ashram grounds. After Andy's walk, he did something called memory work, which was psychological exercise using memories as emotional healing triggers to explore further with Dr. Nassar's guidance. He finished by cranking out 10 push-ups. All this happened every morning between 5 a.m. and 8 a.m., when I would show up with the medicine and we'd go to breakfast together. We had succeeded in getting friendly with other ashram guests and sometimes had conversations during meals. This was a great and welcome addition and helped enormously in our feeling more at ease and less isolated. I had befriended a woman in her 30s named Sunita. She was on vacation with her husband Ravi and their 2 young children. Sunita and I were enormously compatible. We had a similar sense of humor, and it was pure bliss to witness some nonsensical thing happen in the ashram life and only need to catch her eye in order for both of us to dissolve into giggles. We met other ashram guests as well and began to integrate into this life. The less foreign we felt, the more seeds of confidence we planted, and the more Andy's success felt like a possibility. After breakfast, Andy would nap or read in his bed under the ceiling fan and await Dr. Nassar's arrival. Nassar was committed to Andy for these 6 weeks, but he also had other patients, was always on call, and worked at 2 clinics in Pune, about 45 minutes away from our ashram. He traveled around each day on his motorcycle, and he had 3 other doctors interning with him who would take up the slack when he couldn't be with Andy. Whenever Nassar roared into the ashram parking lot area on his motorcycle and came to our room, I could see Andy feeling better and stronger from his presence. When he arrived around 10 a.m., Andy's panchakarma treatment would begin. It involved lots of oil. Oil was worked into his body through massage and was dripped slowly onto his forehead while he lay on an oiled table. It was used in every application and entered every orifice. Each afternoon, Andy would return to our room after his panchakarma treatments in the tower. He wore as few clothes as possible and sloshed along in his slippery flip-flops until we got into the shower together to wash. After just a few days of 3 washings every day, I thought, we should have brought more soap and shampoo. I made a mental note to add those items to my list for my next trip to town with Anirudh. Afterward, I dried Andy and helped him dress in clean clothes with a towel wrapped around me. Next, we'd make our way to the dining hall for lunch, and after that, Andy would nap under his fan. The fan was the only way to keep the gobs of flies off. Then the whole treatment process would be repeated a second time. His treatments all took place on a hardwood table without any padding. This caused some bruised, sore areas, as his body did not have any fat to pad the experience. Nisar usually roared away on his motorcycle before dinner. This routine felt promising. After 4 weeks, I left Andy and all his caregiving needs entirely in the capable hands of Dr. Nisar, and I began 2 weeks of wild travel, discovery, and reconnection with 3 other women. It was a whirlwind. I met my daughter, sister, and niece in Delhi. We traveled to Rajasthan and stayed in a historic fort castle. We went to Ladakh and visited Buddhist monasteries and learned about Ladakhi life. When I called Andy, Dr. Nisar answered, "Andy has had a severe intestinal illness, and I have stayed with him day and night." I was extremely worried, but Dr. Nisar continued, "I believe he will be strong enough to meet you in a few days and travel home, but he has been very ill." When we traveled back to Delhi to meet Andy, I barely recognized him. From a distance, he looked much older than his 65 years, and he was very thin. All our hopes of healing from Parkinson seemed drowned in the reality I saw before me. "They put leeches on my back," Andy told me. "I have welts. I don't think I want to come back to India again." He was defeated. The Parkinson's was still torturing him every day. Our experiment in India with extreme Ayurvedic treatment had failed. We still believed that Ayurvedic medicine had a place and a purpose in Andy's healing. We still had respect and love for Dr. Nisar. We were not sure how much of the treatment effects had been ruined because of the intestinal illness Andy got while I was away. There were days so hard that sometimes I wondered if Andy might want to kill himself. I would cry in fear of finding him hanging dead in one of our trees. He suffered so much. I asked him to tell me if he was going to go that way. "I would never do that, Michelle," he said. "I would never do that to you."